This is the Cereal at Midnight podcast. Hey guys, welcome back to the Cereal at Midnight podcast. My name is Heath Holland, and if you like low-budget movies, B movies, schlock movies, this is the episode for you. I'm talking to Bret McCormick. Now, you may know that name because in 2023, just recently, Visual Vengeance, which is really blowing up in that sort of like VHS low budget movie scene. It's a distributor, part of Wild Eye. They issued the Abomination and Repligator, which are two Bret McCormick films. And at the same time, I'm gonna like pull the curtain back for you a little bit. At the same time, coincidentally, Bret McCormick watched one of my videos. He watched my video about Sam Katzman, legendary B movie film producer, and it's like the Jungle Gym movies and all these things. Watched my Sam Katzman video, and it's like, this guy would appreciate my book, Texas Schlock. So he didn't even know I'd seen the Visual Vengeance releases, and he sent over his book, Texas Schlock, which is B-movie, sci-fi, and horror from the Lone Star States. It's a little bit about Bret, kind of talking about his entree into low-budget filmmaking in the 1980s. It's a little bit about why we love B-movies, and then just a whole lot of a deep dive into the films and the careers of Texas low-budget filmmakers. And I'll just give you a little bit of an overview. I'm not going to read everybody here, but we got Edgar G. Ulmer, who I love, one of my favorite low-budget filmmakers. He's the guy behind Detour and The Black Cat, which is the Universal film with Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff, where Bela Lugosi is like he's on the trail of the Satanist, played by Boris Karloff, for his wife. It's a crazy movie, pre-code sort of a thing. Russ Marker, Jim Sullivan, Tom Moore, Larry Buchanan, Glenn Coburn. Bret McCormick has written himself into the book here too. It is a really, really cool book. So I'm going to put links in the description of this video where you can pick all this stuff up, but I wanted to kind of set the table here. This episode is Confessions of a Schlockmeister, because we go to some really interesting areas here. How difficult was it to make these kinds of movies back in the 1980s, back in the 90s, and what happened after Repligator? Also working with David A. Pryor. You know, I did an audio commentary for the movie Killzone, which is directed by David A. Pryor, and I got to talk to the producer. Well, Bret also worked with David A. Pryor, making movies in Mobile, Alabama. So where did Bret come from? How did he get started? Where is he going now? The book, what he's working on. If you love, like I say, if you love these low budget movies, this is the episode for you. So listen, I had a blast with this conversation. You will too. Without further ado, Bret McCormick. I'm Gen X, and my generation grew up with all this stuff, like the tail end of probably whatever your generation got to enjoy in its heyday. You know, we got Bogart movies. I always say this. People have heard me say this a bunch of times, but like, I feel like I was the last generation to get maybe like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Humphrey Bogart movies, and Mr. Ed all on at the same time on the same dial, you know? Right. And so it all coexisted. It wasn't like now everything's it feels so compartmentalized right now. But, 1986, 1987, something like that. It was everything that, all of movie history was accessible on that dial. And we didn't really have the cable, hundreds of cable channels yet. And these, antenna channels needed time to fill. And so they were like, well, let's throw some Marx Brothers movies on there. Or, the Monkeys and Leave It to Beaver and all that stuff. Like, I grew up with that just as I grew up with whatever was new at the time. And so now I feel this, like, where I'm at right now, I just want to go back to that right now.
Yeah, we all have a tendency to, at some point, become nostalgic about something that no longer exists. What you were describing about the content on the television channels you had to choose from, very much reflects the way I feel about radio from the 60s, because in the 60s, your local radio station, you could hear the latest thing from Johnny Cash or the Monkees or Donovan or the Beatles or the Doors, this
Mhm.
big mishmash of top 40 music, was all coming across the same station. And I think it really helped me develop a more wide range of appreciation,
Right.
because I don't listen to country and western habitually, but I don't listen to any genre of music habitually. I listen to what I feel like is the best
Mhm.
of everything I run across, And I
Right.
think it was nice that without any real effort on your part, that was laid out in front of you back in the 60s. And I think now, thank goodness, we have the internet and you can pretty much find anything, but you have to know it exists before you can go looking for it.
Exactly. Yeah. If you don't know it exists, people, and that's why when I talk about the stuff that I do is because I want to share my passion for it and get people excited about it. So when I make a video about Gene Autry, which I think you watched, right? Because you sent me an
Right?
email
Yeah,
about it.
I loved it.
When I make a video about that, like there's a bunch of people that are watching my channel. They're like, "Who's Gene Autry? Like, what are you talking
Exactly.
about?" But then it's in there, gets in their head, and they have something whether they ever explore it or not, that's fine. But they have heard about it now, and then they can go jump off. And I just bought like 300 old westerns by people that even people who like westerns have never. They're like Ken Maynard. I don't know who that is.
I watched that video and I was thinking, okay, some old guy, probably older than me, bought all of these
Uh
and he
huh.
never even bothered to take them out of the wrapper. So,
Yep.
what was he thinking? Was he thinking, I'm going to preserve these? Or was he thinking, I'll get around to watching them one day and just didn't? Or what?
I
Are
know.
you going to watch all of
I've already started. Oh yeah.
them? Back before Ancient Aliens was a thing, I went to a garage sale in Tulsa, Oklahoma, back around 2002 or something like that. And actually, it was an estate sale, but a lot of the stuff was out in the garage. And I went in, and there was this box of VHS tapes. And I said, "What's this?" And the woman rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, the old guy that lived here was a nut about UFOs. So he collected all of these videos." And I said, "How much for the whole box?" And she was like, $10 or something like that. So I got this box with like 50 VHS tapes. And I learned through those tapes about Zechariah Sitchin and all of these guys that are sort of like huge in the UFO community
Yeah.
and everything. And although I was never a UFO fan the way I am like just a B movie fan.
Hmm.
Uh, Still, it opened my eyes, and it was a serendipitous discovery, to get this box full of tapes and find out all these crazy ideas that people had about UFOs and how serious they were about it and how seriously other people took them about it.
What did you do with? Do you still have them? Like, what happened to those tapes?
Oh, heck no, man. Gosh, my life has gone through so many changes since then, and I'm kind of a minimalist. I mean, I
Yeah.
love movies, and I would love to go through all of those movies that I see, especially the Giallo movies behind
Uh-huh.
you, and watch some of the stuff that you've got on your shelves. But my DVD collection is maybe like 40, 50 DVDs. And before the year is out, I may have traded those to somebody for something else or, traded them for a book at half price books. I really, as I've gotten older, I've become more and more of a minimalist. So this one little room that I'm in right now is where my editing gear is. And I've got costumes and props and boxes behind me. And
Hmm.
this is sort of like my little creative sanctuary here. And beyond the paintings on the wall and stuff like that, I really don't. I I just don't have the collecting gene as I might have had. When I was in my early 20s, I went to garage sales and bought science fiction books. This is probably 1978, 79. And I'm thinking, maybe someday I can open up a used bookstore that just sells science fiction books because I was really into that, you know.
Hmm.
And so I got like hundreds and hundreds of books and finally filled up this closet and just drove my wife nuts. And she relentlessly hounded me to get rid of that stuff, which I did. So that was like my last gasp of major collecting. And that was
Wow.
a long time ago,
Well,
40
it's
years
interesting.
ago.
I think sometimes I do. I'm coming as I'm getting older now. I am starting to have this awareness that maybe collecting is a luxury of youth. When you get older, you start to realize you don't have infinite space, you don't have infinite time, and you don't have infinite interest either because you want to be able to jump around to things. Like I think a lot of the collecting community is arriving at a point right now where we're going, we've spent thousands and thousands of dollars on these discs, and we've like the guy that bought all those old westerns. I'm like, a lot of them are still sealed on a shelf.
Right.
We bought them to have them, but if they're not bringing us any joy, why do we have them? And I think it's not everybody, but I am starting to see these questions pop up.
Well,
So it's interesting.
I think just possessing them did give you a certain amount of joy, and I could see the enthusiasm on your face as you were showing the different box covers and the fact that you got like 7 copies of Mystery Mountain, you know. Um,
You really did watch.
so I think what you're doing is a definite service. It's a service to me. And I think it is YouTube in general. I learn about new things that I wouldn't otherwise know about by watching YouTube. And I'm
Yeah.
reminded of things that I haven't thought of in years. So it's very helpful to me.
That's a good segue because okay, so people I'll have already introduced you. They will know who you are and what you do. Um, but I want to just kind of like lead us here. You watched a video that I made about Sam Katzman, and you said, "Hey, I saw your Sam Katzman video. I wrote a book, and I'm going to hold this up. This is your Texas schlock book, B movie, sci-fi, and horror from the Lone Star State." The Sam Katzman video is what opened this whole conversation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I was studying filmmaking at Brooks Institute in Santa Barbara back in 1979. And I ran across this book in the library at Brooks Institute called Kings of the Bees. And what it really was a collection of articles that had appeared in different magazines. You know, there was an article on Roger Corman, all these different people. Well, there was an article on Sam Katzman, who I really didn't know by name prior to reading that book, but I realized I'd seen dozens of his movies, you know, as a kid growing up. And they called him a Schlockmeister in the book. And from that day forward, schlock was a word I used, and it was not pejorative at all. It was just sort of a subgenre of film that I appreciated and sort of wanted to emulate in my own experience.
Well, that's interesting. So I want to ask you. I know we don't want to give the whole book away. It is a look at different Texas B movie filmmakers. But in you have a little chapter here called Rationale. First of all, there's a link to this book in the description of this video, this episode. If you're listening to the podcast version, check the show notes. There's a link to it so you can pick it up. But you start out by saying, "Why do good people like bad movies?" And then you proceed. Like, I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about that because I think it's fascinating. Smart people, intelligent people liking very bad movies, right? What's
I've
elaborate,
gotten a
please.
lot of grief about that all my life. And one of my earliest memories on that, along those lines, was when I was 8 or 9, maybe somewhere in there. Um, my mom and her good friend Marilyn. My mom had 2 boys, me and my brother, and Marilyn had 2 girls. And my dad was overseas, and Marilyn was without a husband at that time. I guess she had gotten divorced or something. And they decided we're going to go to the drive-in theater, the Mansfield Drive-In here in Fort Worth. and watch these Doris Day, a double feature Doris Day. Well, of course, you're in a car with four young kids trying to watch a Doris Day movie. Things are not going to go well, okay? But it was a double screen drive-in, and on the opposite end, I could turn around and look through the back window of the car, and I could see Jason and the Argonauts playing on the screen behind me. And I'm like, wondering why we didn't go see that movie. And I keep bringing it up. And since I couldn't hear the sound of the movie, when a monster would come up, I would make my own monster noises, you know.
Mhm.
And my mom was like, you know, yelling at me to stop doing that and quit wrecking their experience of the Doris Day movie. Well, after the first feature, we went into the snack bar and there was a poster for an Al Adamson movie. And I don't remember, I think it might have been Blood of Ghastly Horror, but I saw that. And of course, I was really drawn to it. I asked if we could come back to see that because it was like a coming attraction at this
Yeah.
drive. And my mom goes, "No, that is trash. We don't watch movies like that." She tried to explain to me that there were good people in Hollywood who made wholesome movies like the Doris Day movies we were watching. And then there were these really people who played to the lowest common denominator and people's baser instincts and tried to attract ignorant people. And I didn't want to be one of those ignorant people that went and watched movies like that, did I? And I'm like, yeah, I did
Like
want to be one of
stars
those
in your
people. I
eyes.
wanted that poster, you know.
Yeah.
When it was the first time I had heard the word trash applied to a work of art or anything someone had created. So when she said trash, I was confused. Because part of my job in the family was to take the trash out to the curb on trash day. And I'm wondering, are they going to throw this poster away? Does that mean I could come and get it out of their trash can? You know, it's a whole lot of new ideas where I had to grapple with them as I went through that experience that night. And then I found out going forward that I was always drawn to things that even kids my own age thought was trash, you know, and I took a lot of ribbing. When I made my first movie and showed it at school, one of the kids in my PE class asked me why I'd done it, and I said, I'm going to make movies. You know, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a filmmaker. And at that time, Andy Warhol's movies were all over the media. And he's like, "So you're going to be like another Andy Warhol, right?" And I'm like, well, I don't know, maybe, but I'd never seen an Andy Warhol movie, so I didn't know what he was talking about. But he meant that as an insult, like,
Hmm.
"Oh yeah,
Yeah.
you're going to be an Andy Warhol." You know? I knew already that Andy Warhol was gay, and I felt like he was slamming me about that as
Oh,
well,
okay.
questioning my masculinity,
Right.
and also, you know, growing up in a community that was mostly Baptists and Methodists and working class people at the middle school when the guy made that comment, I mean, there was a real redneck, racist, sexist, uh, sort of caveman vibe, you know, that was
Right.
considered the norm. And if you didn't play along with that, you took a lot of ribbing and sometimes got in fights. And I was
Yeah.
that kid that took the ribbing and got in fights.
Right. Yeah. You're Texas. I'm Alabama. It's not that
Yeah.
different. It's
I,
pretty
I
close.
I lived a year in Alabama in Mobile when I had my fifth birthday there.
Okay. Well, see, this is
Mobile.
we got to segue to David A. Pryor at some point because he
Right.
lived in Mobile for a while, and I grew up in Mobile. So
Right.
okay, what? So we're how did you make your first? How did you get into movie? Like, how did you actually start making movies? Like, lead me up to. We're getting to the Abomination. That's where I'm
Oh,
leading us here. It's like,
oh.
how did you build the skills to make a movie? You know?
When I was 12 years old, I read an article in Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine about a group of kids at a boys' club in New York who were making their own Frankenstein movie using home movie equipment. And for years already, I had been spending my allowance every weekend going to the movies. You know, going to the movies was my favorite thing to do. And there was a local old style theater and right there in the neighborhood, and I could see a double feature for 35 cents back then. And so I read this article about these kids making their own movie, and I'm like, it was like lightning struck. I was like, why had I never thought of this before? There were several family members in my extended family who had movie cameras and projectors and stuff, and they would set up and show home movies of the family on holidays when we had gatherings and stuff. And it just, it was like I felt like such an idiot that it had never occurred to me that I could make my own movies. So I got together with John Schultz and John Cottrell and Zeke Zelazny and Bill Hobbs, and we made a werewolf movie about a month later in my backyard there at 4920 Meadowbrook Drive in Fort Worth, Texas. And
Whoever lives there right now, I feel like I hope nobody goes and knocks on their door. Like, I want to see the magic. Show me the
it was
backyard.
kind of a magic place. It was a really, really old house. It was like the first house that had been built in that neighborhood, and it was made out of sandstone, just huge chunks of sandstone. So it looked like a castle, which I loved, you know.
Yeah.
And it was a great location for us to make our cheesy little werewolf movie, which was about 3 minutes long. We showed it at school. The kids loved it,
Was it
and just
Super 8, 8
because
millimeter?
the first one was 8 millimeter.
Okay.
And then my dad was in Vietnam and he had PX privileges, so he could get a really good deal on a Super 8 camera. So he bought me a nice Canon Super 8 camera
Nice.
shortly after that. And I started shooting on Super 8, which was infinitely easier than threading those spools of 16 millimeter film and then flipping it over and exposing the other side, like you used to have to do.
Well, and you would have to go have the film developed, and then did you do
Right.
any? You would have to edit it, right?
Well,
Like
we edited
cutting
in
it.
camera. We
Okay.
edited in camera. Okay, next we need a close up. And so if there was too much of a lag between the shots, we might cut a few frames out and bring it together with the splice. But basically, we tried to edit in camera because it was just seemed like the thing to do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so you shot this. You showed it to the kids at school. Is this the movie that the kids like? Hey, what are you gonna be, Warhol?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I continued making movies from the time I was 12 to the time I graduated high school at the age of 17. So for about 5 years there, I was actively making movies. In my high school years, I was best friends with Bob Camp, who went on to be the Ren and Stimpy, the creative director on Ren and Stimpy. And so we did some animated films when I was hanging out with Bob. And took 1 year of film studies at the University of Texas at Arlington under Andy Anderson, who is pretty, kind of had his 15 minutes of fame with a couple of independent feature films he did after that. One was called Positive ID. When Bob and I were students there, we hassled Andy over and over again. Why don't, as a class project, we make a feature film? We had all this 16 millimeter gear and stuff, and we just thought, it would be much better real life exercise than everybody making their own little 5 or 10 minute film. And he's like, no, I wish I had your enthusiasm. I used to want to make features. I don't do that anymore. Well, I left there. A couple of years later, he did exactly what Bob and I had suggested he do. The class got together. They did a movie called Interface, which was sort of a really low budget science fiction-y mystery kind of a film. And they got it released through Vestron and got a $90,000 advance at that time, which is kind of crazy. Those days were over pretty quick.
Yeah.
But so I always resented that he wasn't ready to do it in 1976, but he did it, 5, 6, 7, 8 years later.
Do you think your conversation was any sort of a catalyst that might have encouraged him to go that
Well,
distance?
I think everything is a catalyst for everything. I believe seeds are planted in our minds every day that grow and ultimately come out in some form. Whether he remembered that being a catalyst or not, I don't know, but I think probably
So
at
I guess
least
you
on a
never followed.
subconscious
You
level.
never sought him out to talk to him
Oh,
about it.
oh yeah, I saw him after that. I saw him after that a few times. rented some equipment from him when I was doing my first feature film. And I think I gave him a little grief about that. And he's like, you know, Andy was a character. He's a little short um, guy from Florida, kind of swarthy, dark hair, had an Italian look about him, but I don't know that he was Italian.
Hmm.
But he was really definitely one of these people you had to work at to have a conversation with him because he was kind of an introvert and you'd say something to him and he'd kind of stare at you for a minute while he's thinking what he's going to say to you or something. I don't know. His personality was a type I had not encountered before, so I didn't really know how to deal with him.
Gotcha. Okay. Uh, The Abomination. It's your first movie, right?
It's not
First,
my first movie. The first movie was Tabloid, which we shot on 16 millimeter. And it was my idea to do a spoof of tabloid journalism, which was kind of a hot item at that time, you know, like Weekly World News, that kind of stuff.
right? Yeah.
Bat Boy found in cave, that kind of crap. And so I thought, I got Matt Devlin, whose name was Matt Chapin at that time, and Glenn Coburn, who had already done a feature of his own called Bloodsuckers from Outer Space. I enlisted them, and the idea was we would make a wraparound, but that each of us would write and direct our own tabloid story and put it together to be an anthology film. So we did that, and God, it was a fiasco. We spent like $112,000 on it, and it was just an unmarketable movie when we finished.
Where did you get $112,000?
Just beating the bushes, friends,
Wow.
relatives, people who had money that I knew who were willing to take a risk and help these kids get their film career off the ground.
Well, that's mid '80s money too, right? So that'd be like double. That'd be
Oh
like
my God.
two
When I
fifty
think
now,
about how
probably.
much money we wasted on that film, it still hurts today, you
So
know?
you didn't get your
So,
money back on it.
no. But the good thing that came out of it was going through that process, I realized I should have gone, instead of listening to the so-called experts, whose advice always led me to spending a lot more money than I wanted to, I should have just done a down and dirty, cheap horror movie, which is what I had wanted to do to begin with, you know. And I think Matt would didn't want to do that because he didn't think it was respectable. He wanted to do something that might possibly be what we called an art house flick back then, you know. And so anyway, after going through all the trials and tribulations and visiting a lot of distributors and seeing what was selling on VHS, I became convinced that the way to go was to shoot two horror movies back to back, 10-day schedule for each movie. After doing a transfer test of Super 8 film, we thought, it's if the only place anybody's ever going to see this is VHS, why not? You know? So we shot on Super 8. We did Abomination and we did Ozone, Attack of the Redneck Mutants. And it was a long, drawn out process. Once the films were finished, it was really, really hard to find someone to distribute it. Uh, by the time we had gone through the process of posting and trying to market Tabloid, Ozone, and Abomination, I realized I wanted out of that partnership. So I dissolved the partnership with Matt. He took the two horror films as part of his set. I took Tabloid, which is impossible to market, but it had a lot of money from my family in it, you know, so I felt obligated to try and do something with it.
Yeah.
Which it never, I made a few deals, made a few $1,000s here and there, but never anything near what we had spent on it. And justly so. It's a bad movie. Um, but some people like bad movies, and we did have a screening of Tabloid a couple of years ago at Texas Frightmare Weekend, and the audience had about 150 people in it, and they all loved it. And when I asked afterwards if this was available on DVD, would you buy it? Most of them raised their hands. So, you know,
It's time
things
has
change over
equalized.
time.
As time equalizes everything, and I mean, we
Yeah,
should. I've already mentioned this in the intro, I'm sure, but I mean, these lavish visual vengeance um, editions of the Abomination and of Repligator. I mean, they're loaded with special features and like all kinds of stuff that could only happen like right now. You know, this is what's happening right now in the collector and
exactly.
the horror community.
Yeah, anything survives long enough, it eventually becomes respectable. I think it was John Waters that said that.
Yeah. It's true. It's very true. Okay, so you've made these movies at this point, and you've dissolved this partnership. Where are you at? Do you go, I got to keep going? Or are you thinking
Oh
about,
yeah, yeah.
are you,
I took a job at Allied Film and Video, which was a post-production and film lab place in Las Colinas, at the Dallas Communications Complex there. And so I'm working that job, but on the weekends I shot a movie called Highway to Hell. And I went to a guy named Tom Moore who had this really down and dirty. He was the only film distributor in Dallas, Texas, and he had this really cheesy company where he sold mostly foreign rights to the really cheesy films. I went to him and I said, if I make a movie and you get to choose a name to play a small part in it, and you get approval of the script, what's the most you will agree to pay me on delivery? And he said, for the foreign rights, I'll give you $20,000. So I went and shot a movie for $10,000. And he hired Richard Harrison, who had been a huge star in Europe back in the 60s and was now doing B movies out on the West Coast and living in Malibu. And Richard Harrison came out for a couple of days and we shot a few scenes with him and put him in the movie as a police detective kind of a guy. But the story is basically about this killer, Toby Gilmore, escapes from prison and manages to get in a car with this young woman who's driving home for the holidays to see her family. And he terrifies her, torments her. She gets away from him, then he catches back up with her. So she's like going cross country in this very rural area and keeps crossing paths with this killer, and he's killing people right and left uh, all along the way. Um, Fran Tucker, the female lead, was played by Blue Thompson, my ex-wife, and who was also in Ozone and Abomination, and a guy named Benton Jennings, who I'd known from high school and who's been out in LA for a long time and is kind of a character actor out there now. He played Toby Gilmore, the psychotic killer. Really, really down and dirty, cheap, another very crude movie. But because I knew I was going to get $20,000, that was the first movie I did on my own. And it was also the first one that immediately turned a profit.
and the rental, it was the like rental sales and things like that. We're talking about like video store stuff, right?
Well, the deal I have with Tom Moore, he paid me $20,000 for the foreign rights. So he
Mm-hmm.
had the rest of the world. I retained the U.S. home video rights, and I never really made any money off of that. You know,
No?
it got released by Radon, and then as soon as they were due to pay me, they filed bankruptcy. So, you know, I really didn't have any.
The narrative is emerging here, you know, opportunistic. So, you know, young filmmaker with a vision makes movie, uh, meets opposition, and things like you get a dissolved partnership here. You've got this company that's going bankrupt, and here, it seems like there's a lot of challenges being thrown your way. I'm just kind of curious, as an emerging filmmaker, how do you meet those challenges? What's your mindset? How are you overcoming these things?
Gosh, that's hard to explain. Well, I
This is
drank
the
a
Merv
lot. I
Griffin
drank a
section.
lot back in those days,
Okay, okay.
which ultimately led to a whole other set of problems. But I was married. I had kids. I was always working a full-time job, making movies on the weekends, typically 4 or 5 weekends in a row. We would shoot a thing and then I would edit, on VHS with time code in
Yeah.
my back room at home and pull those numbers off of that edit and take them to an online suite. Um, After Highway to Hell, I read an article about Fred Olin Ray, and it seemed like he was an up and comer in LA. And I thought he's doing the kind of stuff I want to do. Maybe I can hook up with this guy. So I sent him my demo reel with the trailers from those 4 films and asked him if I could make a film for him. And he got back in touch with me and had me do a movie called Macon County War with Dan Haggerty. He brought Dan Haggerty down here for 3 days, and we shot this kind of rural, supposedly an action film, but there's very little action because the budget was incredibly low, and I that film probably doesn't hold up very well. But about that time, Dan Haggerty had been listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's most recognizable face. So he was a great guy to have in a no budget movie.
I didn't know that fact. That little tidbit.
Yeah.
Is it the beard? What I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
What was your experience like working with Fred?
Oh,
You can be honest.
Fred has to put it politely, Fred has a personality that's an acquired taste. If you're sort of a Zen-like person, which I am most of the time, uh, you see that he behaves the way he does because of his own insecurities and issues. But he's like, I think he must have read somewhere along the way about the old cigar chomping, gruff studio Poverty Row guys that made pictures. And so he kind of developed that persona for himself,
Yeah.
abrasive, uh, often saying things that just add fuel to the fire instead of, using diplomacy or whatever to put the fire out and move on,
Yeah.
in a way that makes sense in the long term. We did ultimately have a falling out, and I didn't talk to him for a long time. But I mean, there are many things I appreciate about Fred, and I am very grateful that I got that opportunity to do that work with him. I did write a screenplay. It was called Athena's Last Stand when I wrote it about a female hitman. Um, and I was supposed to direct it, but I got busy making films for David Winters, and Fred finally got the money together to make it, and so I told him I'd help him find a director, and a friend of mine, a local friend in Dallas named Gerald Kane, who had a commercial filmmaking operation there in the Dallas Communications Complex, was a huge Roger Corman fan, casual acquaintance of mine, kind of a friend. He really wanted to direct a movie. So I set it up for him to direct Athena's Last Stand, which became Fatal Justice. And in exchange, he traded me for 30 hours of free online editing at his facility, which I could use for
Yeah.
editing, my other feature projects.
Well, tell me a little bit about producing. So we talked about filmmaking. Let's talk about producing because you've worked with a lot of interesting people, and I want to get to David A. Pryor because I have a special interest in David A. Pryor. But just tell me a little bit about that.
Well, after I did the film for Fred, I was casting about for other work. He put me in touch with Dave Dakota. I did 2 really dreadful shot on consumer video projects for David Dakota's video label he had going at the time, where J.R. Bookwalter and others had been making shot on video films for him. And after I did that, asked him, I told him I really needed more work, more film work, and could he help me? And he said, well, have you tried David Winters? I think David is a survivor. He's putting out 2 titles a month over at Action International Pictures. And I had met David once before, and he kind of came across as a con man. But I sent him my promo reel, and he saw it and almost right away offered me a film to do. The budget was low enough that it made sense for him. And we did a movie called Armed for Action. And he sent down Joe Estevez to be the name in the picture. And then we did a few months later, we did a movie called Blood on the Badge, again with Joe Estevez and mostly local cast and crew. And so I did those two 16 millimeter movies for him. Then he was in deep financial troubles. I mean, he was always one of those guys who lived beyond his means. He was making lots of money, but he was blowing it. He was really into this high roller lifestyle. And so he had a movie going called Mardi Gras for the Devil in Mobile. And the producer was like getting tired of taking the heat for the fact that his cash flow was such that she was having to make all kinds of excuses to talent agents and people. And it had a lot of recognizable names in that film. It had John Amos and um, gosh, I'm old and I'm having a senior moment, but it had 5 or 6 well-known names in the movie. And it was kind of a horror detective story. So when the producer quit, they had a lady named Jill Silverthorne who was like an associate producer or something. And she wanted to take over producing, but she wanted them to hire someone who could become the fall guy for all the flack they were getting from the agents and everyone. So someone that could be blamed for everything. So I didn't know that, but they said, "Hey man, you want to come produce a movie in Mobile? We got 2 more weeks left. We shot for 2 weeks already. We need someone who can just come head this thing up and finish out the last 2 weeks, and we'll pay you $2,000 a week." And I'm like, "Okay, sure." So I got there, and 3 days after I'd been there, I made sure David Winters gave, because I could see what was going on, made sure David Pryor actually was writing the checks because he was directing and sort of running it. And I had him pay me for both weeks in advance. I sent the money home, and then I just kind of walked through the paces and did as little as possible for the remainder of the shoot because it was just a shitstorm from the word go. And but it was great working with David. I had great admiration for David Pryor. David Winters, not so much. Uh, 3 different occasions. David Pryor to me was one of those Hollywood maverick kind of people from a bygone era, but he was living it out in that era uh, in a way that was very remarkable. Like they had gambling boats in Biloxi. And 3 different nights while I was there, I went and watched him play uh, blackjack. And he was counting cards, and he had Michael Ironside, the actor, at the other end of the table, kind of playing to him to help him win. And one night he won $40,000. Another night he won $80,000 and then lost it all. And another night he won $60,000. He sent that money back to California and paid off his house. But that was the kind of guy he was. I mean, he would definitely take risks, and he ended up paying off his house while we were making that movie by gambling.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
I mean,
it was crazy. I
it's
had
cool,
to
but it's
admire the
crazy.
guy's
Yeah.
guts.
Where in Mobile were you guys? Do you know? Do you remember where you were?
It was a hotel that kind of looked like old New Orleans. It had some wrought iron work on the front of it. I don't
Downtown,
remember
probably.
the, yeah,
Close
downtown,
to the water.
definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, and then we went and shot for a day or two and actually in New Orleans because he wanted a riverboat. They had a scene, wasn't a very good scene, but I mean, it was an attempt to get a little more production value. Um, the
So we're
story
not.
was
We're
kind of
not.
cool.
Are we at Night Trap yet? We're not talking about Night Trap. We're talking.
That's
We're talking
Night
about.
Trap. Yeah, it
Okay.
was it was called Mardi Gras for the Devil, and I think it's available as Mardi Gras for the Devil on
Okay.
some streaming venues. Yeah.
Um, I did a commentary for a David A. Pryor movie called Killzone with
Yeah.
the producer of that
Yeah.
movie, and he was telling me some stuff about working with David A. Pryor, and they had an interesting relationship because after Killzone, it was kind of during Killzone, and I should encourage people to go check out that commentary. It's on the MVD Entertainment Blu-ray. But basically, what happened is during the making of this movie, they had plans for future stuff they were going to do, and then David A. Pryor's like, "I'm just going to go do my own thing," and he creates, the Action International Pictures, which I always, even the name AIP, you call it AIP, you're
Right.
tapping into American International Pictures.
Exactly.
Um,
Which
and
is
so
the
I think
same
maybe there
thing
was
Fred
some,
Olin Ray did too. Fred
yeah,
Olin Ray's company was also AIP.
it's smart, but it's also that it's
It shows that they were fans of that. Yeah.
yes, it's
Yeah.
enterprising. It's also, I don't know. I keep
Derivative.
thinking about what your mom told you. I keep thinking about what your mom told you when you were a kid. She was like, "There's the good people that make movies for everybody, and then there's the
Wholesome
bad people."
movies that are uplifting, not ones that drag you down in the gutter and lead you on the path to hell.
Yeah, with those Action International Pictures people
Those
taking a
biker movies.
mobile
Yeah.
and you're gambling at a riverboat casino.
I know.
Um, so okay, so you guys parted. You had a good amicable relationship with David A. Pryor. Like things stayed pretty.
I liked him a lot, and I very much would have liked to have had the freedom to go where he was and just hang out with him and learn more from him.
Mhm.
He really had just a never say die kind of attitude. He had done like a shot on video thing first, and then I think it was Killzone or maybe it was some other film, but his first shot on film movie, he went out and they shot for like days in the woods. They had rented film cameras to shoot with, and it was only after they got the film processed that they realized they hadn't recorded any audio. They assumed that like video that it was automatically recording audio,
Yeah.
So this is how uneducated about the process they were. But he and his brother just toughed it through and kept on going. And you have to admire that.
Yeah. The sad thing is, so I had a very sheltered childhood, which we don't have to get into that here. But David A. Pryor died. He spent his last days in Mobile, and if I had known I didn't know who he was in the 1980s. I was just a kid, right?
Right.
And I would not have been allowed to see those movies anyway. But if I had known who he was, I probably could have gone and met him and talked to him. And I hate that I didn't know until it was too late that there was
Right.
somebody that was that enterprising spirit, that I could
During
have.
that time that I was there with him, um, he said, I'm moving to Mobile. And I said, Really? And he's like, Yeah. And I said, Why? And he said, I just like the vibe down here. He had become friends with all the people on the police department. He told me that when he came to town that time that the local police chief had showed him a surveillance video from a gas station where a woman had been chopped to death by a jilted lover with an axe, in the booth at the gas station. And so he had that kind of hanging out, playing poker with the local people.
Yeah.
And I think he just liked that he could be the big fish in Mobile as opposed to one of the smaller fish swimming around in Los Angeles.
I want to ask you about Repligator because that's another one that Visual Vengeance has recently put out. You got to work with Brink. I know you shot that movie really, really quickly, right?
I love that movie. Let me start by saying I had very little support from anyone, even my friends, when I did The Abomination. And I had even less support when I did Repligator. But those are two films I wanted to do along my path as a filmmaker. And those are the only two films out of the many films I did that people are still interested in watching. So I think having these new releases has sort of given me a sense of vindication that I was right to go ahead and make these movies, even though everybody was telling me it was a mistake. Um, I had just shot, I had done a movie called Takedown with Chris Heldman playing the lead. I had produced that. I had done a movie called Time Tracers with Jeff Combs, time travel picture. Did a movie called Biotech Warrior, which was my first uh, shot on 35 millimeter film that I directed. And we had a refrigerator full of short ends. And I added it up and I thought, if we're real careful, we could shoot a feature with the film we have left over here. So I went to Keith Jornis, who was a film editor at Remington, York, and I knew he was an aspiring screenwriter and asked if he could write a script in a week and make use of these masks and all this stuff that we had lying around and make sure there was plenty of bare breasts in the movie. And so he and T.G. Weems, the CGI guy there, they came up with the story. They wrote the script in a week. In a few days' time, we uh, cast the thing out of people that we already knew from these other films that we had done. And the girls, came from gentlemen's clubs there in Dallas. And we were trying to shoot on a long weekend, like Friday through Sunday or Friday through Monday, or maybe it was Thursday through Sunday. But anyway, it was intended to be a 4 day shoot because I was trying to do the Little Shop of Horrors thing that Roger Corman had done all those years before.
Well, that's you talk in the intro. You have multiple interviews on the disc, and you talk in several of them about how you had read that Corman had done a movie. I don't remember how quickly it was, but you wanted to see if you could do that yourself.
Yeah, yeah, that was my idea. So we shot it, and right after we finished shooting that, that was my fourth film of the year. And so immediately I put together a letter to Roger Corman and told him I was trying to match his record. And this was like late September, early October that I sent him the letter on my promo reel. I said, I'm trying to do one more film before the year's out so I can match your record. He immediately got back with me and gave me a film that we ended up calling Rumble in the Streets, which was a remake of the movie Streets starring Christina Applegate that he had done several years before that. Um, so I finally got to do my movie for Roger Corman, which is something I had been telling people I was going to do since I was 12 years old. And but that meant Repligator ended up sitting on the shelf because I immediately went into pre-production on the film for Corman. We had all this film that we had shot. I can't remember if it was Keith Jornis or if it was Haley Richter over at Aries Productions, but somebody eventually ended up editing the footage together that we had shot in those 4 days, and it was only 75 minutes long, which wouldn't have been a problem today, but back then was a huge problem because everyone wanted a minimum of 88 minutes and they preferred it to be over 90. So that's when Win Winberg at Aries Productions said, I like what you've got going here. I want to put a little more money into it and get a couple of recognizable names. And he had recently done an academic film with Gunnar Hansen on some topic. And so he had Gunnar's phone number and he called Gunnar and asked if he would be willing to be in it. And then I got in touch with Brink. And so on like 2 consecutive weekends, I think it was, or pretty close to consecutive weekends, we shot their scenes. And that gave us the additional running time that we needed. Even so, after that, Wynn and his father started a distribution company called Group Two Entertainment, and they really didn't accomplish much with the film. So we got a little exposure on Canadian cable and I think maybe a VHS release somewhere along the way. Um, but it wasn't until about 2010 when Glenn Coburn started Whacked Movies and asked if he could re-release it that the film started getting some traction and really sort of gathering a following.
See, you were like 2 years too early with it because the DVD boom was just a couple of years later, and then everybody was just starving for whatever they could get their
Right,
hands on. You
right.
could have,
By
you
that
just,
time, I was so burned out on all the ups and downs of film, and my marriage of 18 years ended and everything. And I just kind of, for about 20 years, I really didn't want anything to do with movies at all.
what did you do with yourself? I mean, you just kept working the day
Not
job?
much, you know.
Yeah.
Until 2014, I had a really bad drinking problem and drugging. And this March, I will be clean and sober for 10 years. So most
Congratulations.
of what I'm proud of in my life, I've accomplished since that time. I've written a lot of books and have gotten these films back out there to an audience that appreciates them. And I'm starting to make some more little micro budget movies of my own. So, and doing it with a clear head instead of through the fog of alcoholism. So
Let me
I'm
ask you
feeling
about
good
that because
about
that's a
that.
good opportunity for you've opened the door for a good journalist question here. Is that so you're sober now? When you look back at your work, do you see compromises or shortcomings? Do you think like, oh, I could have done this differently, or are you clear with it? How do you feel about it?
I think alcoholism for me, and I've noticed this in other people too, was under the influence of alcohol, you're full of bravado. The morning after, you're sort of kind of in this depressed state and you're not making the best choices. So I was always hungover when we were shooting, you know, and eager to get to that first drink of the day at the end of the day. So I think I would have made a lot of different choices, and I would have been more confident about uh, just taking control of the camera and shooting stuff myself instead of paying other people to do it, you know.
Hmm.
Could have, even though those movies were done very cheaply, they could have been done even more cheaply if I had just been willing to take on and clear-headed enough, take on the cinematography and all of that, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could have had total control of your
Right,
vision, right? Yeah.
right, which is what I have now, and I'm feeling real good about that.
Let's talk about it. So tell us what you're working on now. Tell us where all this has led you.
Where it's led me is when we were doing the special features for the Abomination, the cameraman for those was Mark Polonia. And I'd never heard of Mark Polonia. So we're talking maybe 3 years ago, I met Mark. And I really liked him. He's just a real easy guy to get along with. He's very self-deprecating. But he told me he had done 80 features. And I went, really? And so I looked up some of his movies, and some of them I liked, and some of them were not that appealing to me. But I very much admired that he had carved out his own niche and almost his own genre of filmmaking, and his tenacity to keep with this prodigious output. He's getting close to 100 now. Um, is it harks back to people like William One Shot Bodine and people like that were making these really cheesy movies back during the studio period. Anyway, so after I saw his movies and I saw Tangerine and some other films that had been shot on cell phones, I thought I need to learn how to do this because this is a totally different world. First of all, the image quality is good. And this is a totally different world than shooting film and transferring to video and all that kind of expensive stuff that I used to have to do. So with this cell phone right here, I shot a spontaneous making it up as I went along movie as a student project for myself called Christmas Craft Fair Massacre. My partner, Patrice Klepis, makes jewelry and she does a lot of these craft fairs. And I'm often sitting there with her, twiddling my thumbs and getting bored. And we were at a really big one at Christmas time. And I thought, what if the principal of this school is sacrificing people down in the basement? And that became the germ of the idea. And so, just kind of over the next several weeks, got all of my friends and relatives who were willing to play parts in this movie and began learning to shoot video with my phone. And by the end of that production, I had learned a lot. But of course, a lot of the stuff I had shot initially was really awful. But anyway, I cut it into a feature length project, and Rob at Wild Eye released it, and it's available on Tubi. And I like to think of it as a budding Christmas classic that 20 years from now people will watch every Christmas, which is probably not true. But using what I
Never
learned
know.
on that project, I'm now currently in post production on my take on the already very much overdone, but one of my favorite classics, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So that's what I'm
Can,
working on now.
can I tell people I saw a little bit of it? Is that what you shared?
Yes, you're the very
I,
first person other than myself to have seen that footage. So,
Thank you. I'm gonna keep my
and
lips
I
sealed,
value
but
your opinion.
yeah, I'm gonna keep my lips sealed. But what I saw was fun, crazy and fun, is what I would say.
Yeah, it was intended to be crazy and fun.
Absolutely, yeah, clearly so. You don't get that crazy on accident. You have to be aiming for it. It's a tease for people. They're like, "What's he talking about?" They'll know soon enough. You come back and talk to him. No, I mean as a compliment too. I'm not like that's not like a
Oh, I
dig. Like
know, I know. No, well, what you're saying is very much in line with what people were saying about Abomination and Repligator. So, now that
you're
I've got those
consistent.
releases out there,
Yeah.
I'm trying to move forward in that vein.
That's a good. That's exactly what it feels like. How come? So your other work, I know we've got these Visual Vengeance issues of these Blu-rays. If people want to see some of these other films, are they in the digital sphere? Where can they get their hands on
Yeah,
them?
I think most of them are available on Tubi. Uh, I know that they're going to be doing a re-release of Highway to Hell at some point. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah,
Um,
it's interesting. You're
I
getting.
think Biotech Warrior and Time Tracers, which is the film with Jeff Combs, I think those are both available on Tubi. And I think Time Tracers holds up pretty well. Biotech has its own appeal. I like it because I wrote the script and I feel like the pacing's a little bit better than Time Tracers. But Jeff Combs does a great job as Dr. Carrington in Time Tracers. So I was very happy to work with him.
I got to ask you the last page of this book. Which, by the way, any more books? How did you like writing?
Oh, I love writing. I do it all the time. It's one of my favorite things to do. I have,
Time Trap. I wanted to ask you. So is
oh,
this the?
yeah, 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 yeah. It was originally called Time Tracers when I was putting it out as a limited edition DVD release, which I still have some of, and people can purchase them by going to texasschlock.com. Uh, Glenn Coburn suggested that I change the name to Time Trap. Well, I've since learned there's another movie out there with that same title, so I don't know if that played into why he said I should or what. But anyway, so that one limited edition DVD release, only 1,000 copies, all signed and numbered. Um, it's called Time Trap, but it's back to Time Tracers on Tubi, I believe. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
Um, okay, so what I was gonna ask, so this book is they can get the book at the same place,
Yeah,
same.
texasschlock.com is a place where you can go if you want to buy directly from me and have your stuff signed or whatever. If you don't care about that, a lot of the stuff's available on Amazon.
It's a beautiful book too because you do talk about we learn about you, and we see these filmmakers, these Texas B-movie filmmakers through your eyes, because you are walking us through their filmography. So, but that's valuable because we do want people to kind of hold our hands and like, here's why I connect with this. We need
Right,
that, and that's what this is. It's
right.
not, a stuffy academic study of filmmaking, but it is. Listen. You're a very smart guy. You're very accomplished. You're very talented, and it comes through in everything that you do. So, thank you. Congratulations on the book. Congratulations on this next chapter and the rediscovery of the work that you've done in the past. It's a good time right now. So
It is a
congratulations on
good
that.
time, yeah. Plus, I just had my first grandchild, so it's wonderful. It's a
That
great
is great.
time.
Where do you want people to go follow you? Are you active on social media? Well, you've mentioned the website.
I am
Anything else?
not active on social media, although I probably should be. I have a Twitter handle, I think, but I haven't really posted anything on there.
Okay.
Um, if they go to texasschlock.com, there is an email address there that I use for PayPal, but I also use it as a contact point for anybody who just wants to reach out. And I welcome communication from anybody. I get lots of people just sort of serendipitously finding me one way or another and writing to me and asking about things. And I always welcome those conversations. So I encourage anybody who wants to reach out. I'll be glad to talk with you.
This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming here and
Thank
talking.
you,
Thank you
Heath.
for watching that video and reaching out so we can talk about Sam
Keep
Katzman.
up the good work.
Thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure for me.
Me too. Thank you.
I was really this was there was a lot of meat on these bones, you know what I'm saying? Like, I knew we were going to talk about some of these movies. I knew we were going to talk about, like, Repligator is such a cult favorite, it's got such a fan appeal because it's obviously clearly ridiculous. It's also like sexy, and it was one of those releases we were talking about in 2023 that a lot of people were talking about because it's just loaded. And The Abomination is crazy. I mean, absolutely crazy, crazy stuff. So I knew we were going to talk about these movies, but I wasn't sure exactly where else the conversation was going to go. And Mr. McCormick has really impressed me with just his intelligence, his eye to detail, his vision, and it's an absolute blast to talk to him. So remember, links are in the description where you can support him, check out these movies, and you can support and check out Serial at Midnight by liking, rating, and reviewing. I do want to shout out, we are a 5-star podcast on Apple Podcast. I want to read this review to you guys. This comes from Scam Detector 9000, which sounds like a fake account. It's real. Like, I don't think AI wrote this. If it did, the AI is like, it's been listening because it knows what's up. So this says, no one else is doing this. It's a 5-star review. No one else is doing this. Heath has created a wonderful podcast, YouTube channel, and community that many try to capture but can never truly match at the same time, or at the same depth and care that Heath treats his work. The podcast includes industry guests and insiders that have such great perspectives about the entertainment industry. You also get to learn pop culture history when listening. Catch Heath on more commentaries and physical media releases too. So, I didn't write that. That's such a kind... That's a review that's like, I see you, Serial at Midnight. So I want to thank Scam Detector 9000. You can review this podcast too, wherever you get your podcast. You can review them if they're nice. Maybe I'll read them on the show here. But I want to thank you guys for like this. It often feels like Serial at Midnight is kind of a secret. Like every celebrity ever has a podcast. It seems like, and there's never been more competition for your time than there is right now, both in the podcast sphere and on YouTube. So I just appreciate any time that you spend with me. And the only thing I would ask is that you do the little clicky things that you can do to support, to like, hey, I like this, I'll give it a thumbs up, that you do subscribe so that you never miss an episode, because I do try to keep these as topical as possible. And I thank you for doing that. I really do. So listen, I'm going to tell you guys, this is a boom time for podcasts. There was a little bit of a lull from the holiday period into January. It is, I got like daily interviews just about, it seems like 3 things in the next 3 days, 3 interviews in the next 3 days. There's a lot happening, is what I'm saying. So stay tuned. I do not want you to miss these podcasts. They will be coming out probably as soon as I can get them edited and posted. You know, I was kind of on like a 2-week schedule, trying to drop them on Wednesdays. That may be going out the window just so I can keep up, right? Just keep up, get it out there. So do subscribe so you do not miss any of these episodes. You do not want to miss any of these episodes because they are going to be really well worth your time. All right, that's enough of that. Thank you guys. I appreciate you so very much. Stay tuned. Take care. Till next time, I will catch you later.